Grandma Josephine looked at me across the massive marble kitchen island and asked with genuine confusion why I was arriving in an Uber. "What happened to the SUV we bought you for your 23rd birthday?" she asked. Before I could open my mouth in shock, my mother Valerie smiled, took a sip of her expensive wine, and casually replied that my sister needed it more. Everyone in the room froze. Then Grandma did something none of us expected. "My name is Nia. I am 28 years old, and that night 5 years ago completely shattered my family." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your own family try to tear you down to build up someone else. Growing up in a sprawling gated estate in Atlanta, image meant absolutely everything to my parents. My father Marcus and my mother Valerie were obsessed with their country club status, wearing luxury brands and projecting the ultimate illusion of perfect black excellence. In their eyes, my older sister Chloe was the undeniable golden child of the house. She was loud, incredibly flashy, and engaged to an arrogant white man named Trent, whose family supposedly had old money connections. I was always considered the disappointment of the family. They thought I just sat in my bedroom mixing oils and selling cheap lotion online. They had absolutely no idea that my organic beauty brand was quietly scaling to a multi-million-dollar level because I kept my head down and my mouth shut. My only real ally in the family was Grandma Josephine. She built a massive salon empire in the 1980s from the ground up, and she saw that exact same quiet hustle in me. That morning, she had surprised me by having a brand new Range Rover delivered to the local dealership in my name as a reward for my hard work. I was supposed to pick it up that afternoon, but the dealership said my mother had already come by to handle the paperwork. I walked into our formal dining room expecting a joyful birthday celebration. The crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the catered dinner, but the mood instantly turned freezing cold when I saw them. Sitting on the pristine white sofa was Chloe reapplying her expensive lip gloss, while Trent casually twirled a brand new set of Range Rover keys around his index finger. I dropped my purse and stared at them in absolute disbelief. I asked Trent why he had the keys to my car. He let out a condescending chuckle and looked at me like I was a lost child. He said they were actually his keys now. Chloe chimed in with her usual sugary sweet tone, saying Trent really needed a luxury vehicle for his new crypto startup. She claimed he had to project a highly professional image to secure venture capital, and arriving to important corporate meetings in his old sedan just was not cutting it anymore. I turned to my mother demanding an explanation. Valerie did not even flinch. She adjusted her diamond necklace and told me to lower my voice and stop being so dramatic in front of our guests. She said I worked from home in sweatpants selling homemade lotion on the internet, so I obviously did not need a luxury SUV sitting in the driveway. She fully expected me to sacrifice my birthday gift so her entitled future son-in-law could play pretend CEO. My father Marcus walked into the room swirling a glass of bourbon and immediately took their side. He told me to stop being selfish and think about the bigger picture for once in my life. He said family supports family, and Trent was about to make them all very wealthy with his investments. The sheer entitlement in that room was suffocating. Trent sat there with a smug grin on his face, clearly enjoying watching my own parents put me in my place. He tossed the keys in the air, caught them effortlessly, and told me I could borrow the car on weekends if I promised to put gas in it and wash the windows. I felt the heat rising in my chest, ready to explode and tear the room apart. But I did not have to say a single word. Grandma Josephine, who had been sitting quietly in her armchair observing the entire spectacle, slowly placed her teacup on its saucer. She did not yell. She did not argue with my parents. She simply pulled her phone from her purse and dialed 911. The room went dead silent as she pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "I need to report a stolen vehicle. Yes, a brand new Range Rover. The thieves are currently sitting in my son's living room." Valerie shrieked in horror and dropped her wine glass, sending dark red liquid spilling all over the expensive Persian rug. She lunged forward, begging Grandma to hang up the phone, pleading that it was just a simple family misunderstanding that could be resolved privately. Trent jumped up from the sofa, his face turning pale red, insisting loudly that he had permission from the parents to take the vehicle. Grandma Josephine looked him up and down with absolute disgust. She informed him that the car was purchased through her private trust, and the only authorized legal owner was me. She said Valerie had zero legal authority to sign that vehicle over to anyone, let alone a man who had not earned a single thing in his life. Within 10 minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers illuminated our front windows. 2 officers walked through the heavy double doors into the dining room. Trent immediately stepped forward, puffing out his chest and attempting to use his loud, privileged voice. He told the officers there was a huge mistake and bragged that he knew the chief of police personally. He actually reached out to pat one of the officers on the shoulder as if they were old friends. The officer did not smile. He grabbed Trent's arm, spun him around roughly, and slapped cold metal handcuffs onto his wrists right in the middle of our formal dining room. Trent shouted in panic, his tailored suit wrinkling as he was shoved toward the front door. Chloe screamed hysterically, crying that her wedding was ruined and begging our parents to do something. I stood there perfectly still as the reality of my family's betrayal sank in deeply. But this arrest was only the beginning of a much larger nightmare. The flashing lights from the police cruisers reflected off the crystal chandelier in our dining room, casting jagged red and blue shadows across the walls. Trent was sweating profusely now. The smugness he wore like a second skin had completely melted away as the officer locked the handcuffs around his wrists. He stammered something about a misunderstanding, his voice cracking as he looked toward my parents for salvation. Chloe was practically hyperventilating, gripping my mother's arm and sobbing that her perfect wedding would be ruined if her fiancé had a criminal record. My mother Valerie turned to me, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged energy. She grabbed my shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "Nia, you have to fix this right now. Tell the officers you gave him the keys. Tell them it was a birthday surprise gone wrong. Do not do this to your sister." I calmly removed her hands from my shoulders and stepped back. I looked at the officers who were already leading Trent toward the front door. "Officer," I stated clearly, my voice ringing out in the quiet room. "I have never given him permission to touch my property. I want to press full charges." My father Marcus, who had been standing frozen by the fireplace, suddenly erupted. The veins in his neck bulged against the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He stormed across the room, his heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "You ungrateful, spiteful little brat! How dare you bring the police into my home? How dare you embarrass this family in front of our guests?" I did not flinch. I stood my ground and looked him straight in the eye. "I didn't embarrass this family, Dad. You embarrassed yourselves the moment you decided my birthday gift belonged to the golden child's arrogant boyfriend. I am simply reclaiming what is legally mine." Marcus's face turned an alarming shade of purple. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and dragged me toward the front door. The heavy mahogany door swung open, revealing the torrential Atlanta rain pounding against the pavement. He shoved me out onto the covered porch. "If you are going to act like a stranger, then you can live like one. You are no longer my daughter. You are a failure, just like that cheap online store you waste your life on. You will never amount to anything in this world without my name behind you." Before I could say another word, the door slammed shut with a deafening thud. The deadbolt clicked into place. I stood alone on the porch, the cold wind whipping rain against my face. A few moments later, my bedroom window opened on the second floor. Chloe leaned out, her face twisted in an ugly sneer, and dumped my overnight bag onto the lawn. It hit a puddle with a wet smack, my few belongings spilling out into the mud. I did not cry. I had shed all my tears for this family years ago when I finally realized their love was entirely conditional. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen smeared with raindrops, and calmly booked an Uber to the St. Regis Hotel downtown. I watched the police cruisers pull away, Trent secured in the back, and felt a deep, satisfying warmth spread through my chest despite the freezing rain. The ride to the hotel was silent. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows as I sat in the back of the car, processing the absolute finality of my father's words. I was officially disowned, but I was also officially free. I checked into a luxury suite, stripping off my damp clothes and ordering room service. I fell asleep instantly, exhausted by the adrenaline and the emotional toll of the night, but feeling more peaceful than I had in years. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my suite, promising a fresh start. I woke up feeling rejuvenated, ready to organize my life and formally cut ties with my toxic relatives. I called down to the front desk to extend my stay for another week while I arranged for a permanent apartment. The concierge was incredibly polite, but her tone shifted slightly after a few moments on the keyboard. "Ms. Adams, I apologize, but the credit card on file has been declined for the extension. Would you like to provide another form of payment?" I frowned, a knot of confusion forming in my stomach. That shouldn't be possible. I had plenty of funds in my personal checking account to cover the stay. I politely asked her to try it again, assuring her there must be a bank error. She tried twice more, but the result was the same. The card was completely frozen. I hung up the phone and immediately opened my banking app. The screen loaded slowly, the little loading circle spinning like a countdown to disaster. When the numbers finally appeared on the screen, my heart slammed against my ribs. My personal checking account, the one I had carefully managed since college, the one where I kept my emergency savings, showed a balance of negative $150,000. I stared at the screen, my mind racing to comprehend the impossible negative balance. I refreshed the app. I logged out and logged back in. The red numbers glared back at me unchanged. Negative $150,000. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I clicked on the transaction history, my fingers trembling slightly. The account had been drained over the past 6 months through a series of massive automated transfers, but it wasn't just my money that was gone. The bank had linked my checking account to a massive commercial loan, a loan I had absolutely no knowledge of. I clicked on the loan details, and the name attached to the debt made the blood freeze in my veins. The loan was registered to a business entity called Hayes and Adams Innovations, LLC. Trent's last name was Hayes. Chloe's last name was Adams. They hadn't just tried to steal my car. They had stolen my identity. They had used my pristine credit score, my impeccable financial history, to secure a massive business loan for Trent's failing crypto startup. And because my parents still had access to my old mail at the family estate, they had intercepted the bank statements and hidden the fraud perfectly. I sat on the edge of the plush hotel bed, the reality of their betrayal crashing over me like a physical weight. They had bankrupted me. They had intentionally tied my future to Trent's inevitable failure. They thought I was just a naive girl making homemade lotion who would never figure it out until it was too late. They had severely underestimated who they were dealing with. My hands gripped the warm cardboard of a coffee cup so tightly my knuckles turned white. The steaming black liquid rippled with the slight tremor in my fingers, a physical manifestation of the betrayal coursing through my veins. But by the time I raised my head to look at the bank manager across his polished mahogany desk, my eyes were entirely dry. They were cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the daughterly devotion I had desperately clung to for 28 years. "Mr. Sterling." A man I had known since I opened my very first savings account as a teenager shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and pushed a thick stack of freshly printed documents across the desk toward me. He explained in a hushed, nervous tone that a commercial line of credit for $150,000 had been finalized exactly 6 months ago. It was an unsecured loan, heavily leveraged against a pristine credit score. My credit score. I stared down at the signature line on the final page of the contract. It was a flawless, practiced forgery of my handwriting, signed right below my personal Social Security number. I asked him point blank, who authorized the transfer of these funds? Mr. Sterling swallowed hard, refusing to meet my direct gaze. He told me the funds were dispersed directly into a corporate account registered to Hayes and Adams Innovations. He added, his voice barely a whisper, that the primary guarantors listed as co-signers on the application were Marcus and Valerie Adams, my own parents. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in my mind, forming a picture so grotesque it made my stomach turn. They had stolen my identity. They knew Trent's ridiculous cryptocurrency venture was bleeding cash and was entirely unbackable by any legitimate financial institution in the city. They also assumed I was just a struggling creative pushing cheap body butter from a tiny apartment. In their arrogant status, obsessed minds, they genuinely believed I would never have the financial literacy to check my credit report. Nor would I ever require a credit score high enough to trigger a fraud alert. They literally banked on my supposed failure to fund my golden child sister's fraudulent lifestyle. I thanked Mr. Sterling, gathered the heavy stack of documents, and walked out of the bank with a terrifying sense of absolute clarity. The tears were gone. Only the strategy remained. I drove straight to the Oak Ridge Country Club. It was a bright Sunday afternoon, which meant my parents would be holding court at their usual premium patio table, sipping overpriced mimosas and performing their favorite play of generational wealth for their high society friends. I strode through the grand lobby, ignoring the hostess who tried to ask for my membership number. I pushed through the heavy glass doors leading to the veranda. The sun was shining brightly over the perfectly manicured green golf course, a stark, beautiful contrast to the absolute darkness brewing inside my chest. I spotted them immediately. Marcus was wearing a crisp pastel polo shirt, laughing loudly at a joke Trent was telling. Valerie was adjusting her oversized designer sunglasses, while Chloe leaned over her plate to snap a picture of her avocado toast for her thousands of fake social media followers. They looked like a magazine advertisement for the perfect, untouchable American family. I walked directly up to their table and dropped the stack of bank documents right in the center, intentionally knocking over a crystal water goblet. The ice cubes spilled across the pristine white linen tablecloth, soaking into the fabric. The laughter died instantly. Valerie ripped off her sunglasses, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She hissed at me through clenched teeth, demanding to know what I was doing, ruining their Sunday brunch and embarrassing them in public. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the satisfaction of a screaming match. I leaned in close, resting both my hands firmly on the table, and calmly informed them that I had just come from a very enlightening meeting with Mr. Sterling at the bank. I pointed a steady finger at the loan papers and asked Marcus how exactly my social security number ended up on a massive commercial contract for a man who was currently out on bail for grand theft auto. I expected panic. I expected a frantic denial. I even expected them to beg for my forgiveness to save their precious reputation. Instead, Valerie let out a long theatrical sigh of sheer exasperation. She picked up a dry linen napkin, dabbed a drop of spilled water from her diamond tennis bracelet, and looked up at me with absolute chilling disdain. She told me I was overreacting and causing an unnecessary childish scene. She actually had the audacity to lean forward, look me dead in the eye, and say that they had put a roof over my head for 18 years. They had fed me, clothed me, and paid for my braces. She said this loan was simply my repayment to the family for everything they had sacrificed. She claimed Trent was on the verge of a massive technological breakthrough, and that my credit score was just sitting there doing absolutely nothing useful anyway. Marcus chimed in, adjusting his heavy gold watch, telling me to stop being so dramatic and start being a team player. He said they needed the liquid cash to ensure Chloe had the luxurious wedding and life she deserved. He looked at me with deep disappointment and said that since I was clearly going nowhere with my little lotion business, I owed it to the family to step up and provide the collateral. Chloe rolled her eyes, loudly complaining to the waiter hovering nearby that my negative energy was completely ruining her appetite. Trent leaned back in his chair, thoroughly enjoying the fact that my parents were entirely validating his parasitic existence. He reached into his monogrammed leather wallet, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and slid it across the wet tablecloth toward me. He smirked, the unearned arrogance radiating from his every pore. He told me to take an Uber home, calling me kid, and suggested I let the adults handle the real business investments. I looked down at the $20 bill. I looked at my mother's cold, unfeeling eyes and my father's dismissive posture. I did not scream. I did not flip the table or cause the scene they so desperately wanted to use against me. I simply smiled. It was a terrifying, hollow smile that made Trent's smirk falter for a fraction of a second. I told Trent to keep his spare change. I turned on my heel and walked away from the table, my shoes clicking sharply against the stone patio as I exited the club. What none of them realized as they went back to sipping their mimosas was that my phone was tucked perfectly in my breast pocket, and I had just secretly recorded their entire legally binding admission of identity theft and wire fraud. The air outside the country club was thick with Georgia humidity, but I felt nothing but ice-cold precision. The $20 bill Trent had so graciously offered me was still folded in my pocket right next to the phone that had just captured their entire confession. I did not drive back to the tiny apartment they assumed I lived in. Instead, my driver pulled up to a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The camera positions itself right over my shoulder, focusing tightly on my laptop screen as a progress bar completes the secure upload of the audio file to my legal team's encrypted server. Slowly, the camera pulls back, revealing the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse executive office. The panoramic view of the city skyline sits behind my sleek mahogany desk. My family genuinely believed I spent my days in a cramped kitchen mixing shea butter in plastic bowls and begging for online sales. What Marcus and Valerie willfully ignored because they were too busy chasing proximity to white wealth was the reality of what I had actually built. My little lotion store was Zenith Botanicals, a vertically integrated organic beauty and supply chain logistics empire. I had completely bootstrapped the entire operation from the ground up. I did not just sell products. I owned the manufacturing facility, the distribution warehouses, and the patent rights to proprietary extraction methods. And exactly 48 hours before my parents decided to steal my identity to fund Trent's fraudulent lifestyle, I had sat at this very desk and signed an exclusive nationwide distribution deal with Sephora. The contract was worth $25 million. While my father was out bragging to his golf buddies about Trent's imaginary crypto millions, my company was preparing to go global. I had more than enough liquid capital to cover the stolen $150,000, but covering it was never an option. You do not heal a severed limb with a Band-Aid, and you do not respond to identity theft with a polite warning. I picked up my desk phone and called Harrison Vance. He was widely known as the most ruthless, razor-sharp corporate litigator in Atlanta. He did not lose, and he did not play nice. When he arrived at my office, he listened to the audio recording of my parents admitting to the fraud. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and asked me how deeply I wanted to bury them. I told him I wanted to own the ground they were buried in. We started with the police report formally filing the identity theft and wire fraud charges, with the federal authorities citing the specific financial documents and the audio recording as evidence. But putting my parents in a legal bind was not enough. I needed to dismantle the core of their delusion, and that core was Trent. Harrison deployed his team of forensic accountants to dig into the finances of Trent's supposedly groundbreaking crypto startup. It took less than a day to uncover the truth. The startup was a complete shell, bleeding cash and drowning in high-interest commercial loans that Trent was personally liable for. The $150,000 my parents stole was barely keeping him afloat. Harrison laid out the legal strategy. Instead of just freezing the stolen funds, we formed an anonymous shell corporation, a blind LLC registered in Delaware. Using a fraction of my Sephora advance, I authorized Harrison to approach the primary lending bank holding Trent's corporate debt. We quietly purchased his entire debt portfolio. The bank was thrilled to offload the high-risk, toxic loans, completely unaware of the family dynamics at play. Trent had no idea that the faceless investment group that now held his financial life in its hands was actually the sister-in-law he had just mocked with a $20 bill. I literally owned him. Every late fee, every collection notice, Every threat of bankruptcy now required my personal authorization. I stood by the window looking out over the city as Harrison finalized the transfer documents. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and they were completely oblivious. They were still planning a lavish magazine cover wedding entirely funded by stolen money and a house of cards that I now controlled. The sheer audacity of their ignorance was almost poetic. They thought they had successfully discarded the weakest link in the family, unaware that I was the only thing standing between them and absolute financial ruin. My phone buzzed on the glass desk, pulling me away from the skyline view. The screen illuminated with a text message from Chloe. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. She wrote that she knew things had been extremely awkward lately, and she understood that I was probably struggling financially after the misunderstanding with the car. She said that despite my bad attitude at the country club, she was choosing to be the bigger person. She was officially inviting me to her extravagant wedding next month. She added a little note at the bottom mentioning that the head tables were reserved for important investors and Trent's wealthy family, but she had secured a spot for me in the back row near the kitchen doors. It was a pity invite designed to rub my nose in her supposed triumph and remind me of my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. I picked up the phone, tracing my thumb over the smooth glass. I read her condescending words twice, feeling a genuine, terrifying smile spread across my face. I opened the keyboard. I did not type out my anger, and I did not demand respect. I simply typed my RSVP. I told her I was so grateful for her kindness, and that I wouldn't miss it for the world. I hit send, tossed the phone back onto the desk, and turned to Harrison. I told him to prepare the foreclosure and collection notices for the Monday morning after the ceremony. It was time to let them enjoy their final days of blissful ignorance. The camera slowly orbits around me as I stand perfectly still before the floor-to-ceiling mirrors of my penthouse bedroom. The heavy silk of my emerald green designer gown slips effortlessly over my shoulders, contouring to my frame. It is an understated dress, completely devoid of flashy sequins or loud branding, but it is violently expensive. It represents the kind of quiet, impenetrable wealth that whispers, while my parents and my sister have always preferred to scream. My phone sits on the illuminated vanity, the screen still glowing faintly with my sent message. I wouldn't miss it for the world. My sister Chloe genuinely thought she was inviting a broken, defeated, bankrupt scapegoat to sit in the shadows of her perfect day. She wanted me there as a prop, a pathetic contrast to her own fabricated success. She had absolutely no idea she had just handed me a front-row ticket to her own demolition. The wedding preparations were completely bankrupting my father. Chloe was acting like royalty, making increasingly absurd demands that Marcus could not actually afford. She required imported white orchids flown in directly from Holland, a custom designer gown straight from the Paris runways, a 6-tier cake adorned with edible gold, and a reception at the absolute most exclusive historical venue in Atlanta. Marcus was drowning in vendor invoices, but his pride was a bottomless pit. He absolutely refused to look like a struggling middle-class man in front of Trent's wealthy old money-white relatives. He needed to project the image of a financial titan, even if it meant destroying everything he actually had. But his boutique real estate firm was bleeding cash. His existing properties were over-leveraged, and traditional banks had already cut off his credit lines due to missed payments. He was backed into a desperate corner, needing liquid capital immediately to pay the high-end vendors who were actively threatening to walk out just weeks before the ceremony. That blind desperation pushed him to cross a line so incredibly dark, so entirely unforgivable, that it made stealing my identity look like a minor offense. Harrison, my ruthless corporate lawyer, had kept his team of forensic accountants tracking my parents' every financial footprint, ever since we uncovered the commercial loan they took out in my name. We needed to know exactly how deep their fraud went and what other liabilities they were hiding. Early on a Tuesday morning, Harrison called me into his office. He did not offer me coffee or engage in small talk. He simply slid a heavily redacted property deed and a stack of loan origination documents across the polished desk. My father had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on Grandma Josephine's house. Years ago, when Grandma's health briefly declined, Marcus had helped her set up her living trust and retained a dormant power of attorney, strictly meant for medical emergencies. He exploited that legal loophole, forged the necessary secondary authorizations, and leveraged the absolute only unencumbered asset left in our entire family. He risked the historic estate she had paid off 30 years ago with money earned from standing on her feet 12 hours a day in her salon. He bypassed all moral boundaries and bet his own mother's safety just to pay for Chloe's temporary ice sculptures and champagne towers. He went through a predatory shadow, lending firm that charged exorbitant interest rates, knowing a traditional bank would have required Grandma Josephine to be physically present for the underwriting. If Marcus defaulted on this shady high-interest loan, the consequences would be catastrophic. Given his current financial freefall and the fact that Trent's crypto startup was actively collapsing under our anonymous pressure default, was not just a possibility, it was an absolute mathematical certainty. When he missed those payments, the bank would foreclose. Grandma Josephine, the woman who had built our family's foundation, the only person who had ever shown me genuine love and protection, would be thrown out onto the street by a ruthless collection agency. A cold, methodical fury settled deep into my bones. My parents had already tried to steal my future, and I had handled that with corporate precision. But now they were gambling with the legacy and the physical home of the matriarch. I looked at Harrison across the desk and told him we were not going to let that happen. We were not going to wait for Marcus to inevitably fail. We were going to accelerate the inevitable. I authorized Harrison to tap directly into the cash advance from my Sephora distribution deal. We did not go to the police about the forged power of attorney. Involving the authorities right now would freeze the asset in a lengthy criminal investigation, leaving Grandma's house in legal limbo. Instead, my anonymous Delaware LLC quietly approached the predatory lending firm Marcus had used. Through Harrison, we offered to buy my father's specific debt portfolio outright at a premium in pure liquid cash. The shady lenders, completely unaware of the explosive family dynamics at play, happily washed their hands of the high-risk liability. They signed the transfer paperwork and relinquished the deed that very same afternoon. I stand in front of my mirror adjusting the delicate clasp of my diamond earrings as I prepare to leave for the rehearsal dinner. The camera completes its slow orbit, stopping right in front of me to capture the absolute certainty in my eyes. Chloe's wedding was going to be the social event of the season, built entirely on a foundation of lies, fraud, and stolen money. But the house of cards they were all dancing in no longer belonged to a faceless bank. It belonged to me. By legally purchasing that secondary mortgage through my holding company, I was no longer just the estranged daughter they had thrown out into the rain. I was officially their primary creditor. I was their landlord. I held the deed to their absolute ruin, and I was going to collect every single penny. The sharp, sterile ringtone of my private cell phone shattered the quiet, calculated triumph of my executive office. It was a dedicated line, a number given to exactly one person, the head nurse at Grandma Josephine's assisted living community. The moment I saw the caller ID, the world around me blurred. A visceral, shaky moment of pure vulnerability tore through the corporate armor I had so carefully constructed. The steady rhythm of my breathing hitched as the nurse calmly yet urgently explained that Josephine had suffered a mild stroke and was currently being rushed by ambulance to Atlanta General Hospital. My hands trembled as I grabbed my keys, my mind racing through 100 terrifying scenarios. Josephine was the only person in the Addams family who had ever shown me an ounce of genuine love. She was the one who bought me my first chemistry set when my parents told me science was not for girls. She was the one who slipped me cash for college textbooks when Marcus cut me off. The thought of losing her paralyzed me. But by the time my driver pulled up to the emergency room entrance, the sheer panic had completely evaporated. It was replaced by a smooth, icy resolve. The metaphorical camera of my mind steadied gliding down the sterile fluorescent-lit corridors of the neurology ward with absolute unwavering focus. I was no longer a frightened granddaughter. I was an executive stepping onto a battlefield. As I approached the intensive care unit, I spotted room 412. The door was slightly ajar, and the unmistakable shrill sound of my mother's voice leaked into the quiet hallway. I paused, pressing my back against the cool plaster wall, listening. Valerie was not weeping. She was not holding her mother-in-law's hand or praying for a swift recovery. She was calculating. I heard Chloe whine, her voice tight with selfish anxiety, complaining about the outstanding balance on her luxurious Maldives honeymoon package. She was practically throwing a tantrum, stating that if Trent's crypto money did not clear by Friday, they would lose the exclusive overwater bungalow she had already bragged about on Instagram. Valerie hushed her, not out of respect for the dying woman in the bed next to them, but with a venomous, practical efficiency. She told Chloe to stop stressing callously, stating that Josephine's current condition was actually a blessing in disguise. I stood in the shadows, my blood turning to liquid nitrogen as I listened to my own mother casually outline a plan to immediately liquidate Grandma's antique Cartier jewelry collection. Valerie confidently assured Chloe that Marcus was already drawing up the paperwork to quietly sell off the remaining equity in Josephine's historic estate to cover the wedding debts and the tropical honeymoon. They were treating a vulnerable, semi-conscious woman's hospital bed like a personal ATM. They were actively plotting to strip her of her dignity and her assets while she lay hooked up to heart monitors. The sheer, unadulterated greed was sickening, but the dramatic irony was profound. They had no idea that I already owned the deed to that exact house, and they were planning to sell an asset that belonged entirely to me. Heavy, arrogant footsteps echoed from down the hall, pulling me out of my thoughts. I stepped further back into the alcove. It was Trent. He was moving with that familiar, unearned swagger, accompanied by a man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, clutching a battered leather briefcase. It was a bottom-tier lawyer, the kind of sleazy opportunist who operated out of strip malls and specialized in predatory coercion. Trent pushed the hospital door wide open loudly, announcing his arrival to Valerie and Chloe. He confidently told them he had the documents ready to go. He bragged that all they needed was for Marcus to prop Josephine up in bed long enough to wrap her fingers around a pen and drag it across the signature line. They were attempting to force a heavily medicated, incapacitated elderly woman to sign over a complete, irrevocable power of attorney. They wanted total, unchecked control of her estate, her bank accounts, and her medical decisions, effectively stripping her of every legal protection she had left in the world. I did not wait for Marcus to arrive. I did not give them the satisfaction of completing their grotesque little scheme. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly into the center of the hospital room. The room went dead silent. Chloe gasped, stepping back against the heart monitor while Valerie's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. Trent immediately puffed out his chest, stepping forward to block my path to Josephine's bed. He demanded to know who let me in, pointing a finger at my face and ordering me to leave before he called hospital security. His rent-a-lawyer stepped up right beside him, popping the latches on his briefcase and smugly holding up the fraudulent power of attorney documents as if they were a shield. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at Trent. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Valerie's pale, terrified face. I reached into my designer tote bag, pulled out a thick, legally binding, heavily notarized dossier, and dropped it directly onto the rolling metal hospital tray with a resounding thud. I leaned forward, my voice deadly quiet, and informed Trent's lawyer that if he took one step closer to my grandmother, I would have him disbarred and prosecuted for elder abuse and felony coercion. I explicitly stated that the document resting on the tray was an irrevocable medical and financial proxy. It had been drafted by Atlanta's top estate firm and signed by Josephine exactly 3 years ago, the very moment she first realized her son Marcus was attempting to quietly drain her retirement accounts. I looked around the room, taking in their horrified, crumbling expressions, and delivered the absolute final blow. I am her sole proxy. I make every single medical decision. I control every single asset she owns. I am the only one with legal authority in this room, and I want all of you out of my grandmother's sight before I have you escorted out in handcuffs. The heavy hospital door clicked shut with a sharp, definitive thud, severing my family from their intended victim. I stood by Grandma Josephine's bed, watching her chest rise and fall steadily in the quiet room. Once I ensured she was completely safeguarded by the private security firm I had hired directly on my way to the hospital, I returned to my sanctuary to assess the fallout. A medium shot pushes in slowly on my face as I sit in my penthouse office. The warm, ambient lighting of the Atlanta skyline behind me shifts into a harsh, cool blue, reflecting the glow of my laptop screen. I am wearing noise-canceling headphones, sitting entirely motionless, absorbing the absolute poison filtering through the audio file playing on my screen. Harrison's private investigator, a former federal agent who specialized in corporate espionage, had been tailing Trent since the very moment my anonymous LLC purchased his toxic debt. Trent was a remarkably sloppy and arrogant target. The audio had been captured at a dimly lit high-end bourbon bar in Buckhead, recorded just 2 hours after I had publicly humiliated him and his rent-a-lawyer in the intensive care unit. Trent was drinking heavily, his voice slurred loud and dripping with unadulterated venom. He slammed his glass against the bar top, cursing my name and the medical proxy that had permanently blocked him from liquidating Josephine's estate. Then the real Trent bled through the audio. The polished, charming fiancé vanished, entirely replaced by a vicious, racially biased opportunist. He laughed at Marcus and Valerie, mocking them with a chilling, calculated cruelty. He ridiculed the way my father bent over backward, bankrupting himself just to impress Trent's old money white relatives. He described Marcus as a pathetic performing monkey, gleefully detailing how my parents were clueless and desperate to fit in with a society that actively mocked them behind closed doors. Trent bragged to his lawyer about how remarkably easy it was to manipulate Valerie with a few strategic designer name drops and fake country club invitations. He laughed at how easily my parents traded their dignity for a seat at a table that would never actually accept them. He viewed my entire family as nothing more than a temporary bankroll, a convenient, gullible stepping stone to fund his sinking ship until he could bleed them dry and discard them. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I harbored deep, justified anger toward Marcus and Valerie for what they had done to me, but hearing this parasite degrade them with such blatant racist contempt sparked a completely different kind of fury. They were fools, but they were fools being actively preyed upon by a man who despised their very existence. I decided to give my sister one final solitary chance to save herself. Despite everything Chloe had done, despite her dumping my belongings into the mud and cheering as my father disowned me, I wanted to believe that hearing the man she loved speak about her own parents with such disgusting racist vitriol would wake her from her delusion. I stripped all metadata from the audio file, attached it to a secure, untraceable email, and sent it directly to Chloe's personal inbox. The subject line was completely blank. My private investigator had embedded a sophisticated read receipt tracker within the email. I watched my secondary monitor as the digital footprint glowed in real time. The notification flashed green, delivered. Then it flashed yellow, opened. The progress bar indicated the audio file was being downloaded and played. I waited, holding my breath in the cool silence of my office, anticipating the inevitable explosion. I expected her to call Valerie, sobbing hysterically. I expected her to cancel the dress fittings, to torch the wedding registry, to throw Trent out onto the street and call off the entire lavish affair. 10 agonizing minutes passed, then 20. My phone buzzed on the desk with an Instagram notification. Chloe had just updated her story. It was a perfectly filtered golden hour selfie of her and Trent clinking expensive champagne glasses at a premium tasting menu restaurant. The caption was written in sparkling pink font, reading that she was enjoying the perfect evening with her Prince Charming, counting down the days until forever. She had heard every single vile racist word. She had listened to him mock her parents' desperate financial ruin and reduce her entire family to a pathetic, disposable joke. And she consciously chose the aesthetic. She chose the fake, curated lifestyle over reality, over dignity, and over her own flesh and blood. A moment later, the tracking software pinged one final time on my monitor. The anonymous email had been permanently deleted. I slowly removed my headphones, letting them rest on the smooth mahogany wood. A chilling, profound silence washed over the room. Any lingering trace of sisterly guilt, any microscopic shred of familial obligation I still harbored deep down, evaporated instantly into the cold air. Chloe was not a victim of Trent's manipulation. She was a willing, eager accomplice, entirely complicit in her own destruction as long as it looked good on camera and secured her proximity to his perceived status. She was entirely too far gone to be saved. I picked up my phone and dialed Harrison's direct line. He answered on the first ring, his tone sharp and ready. I kept my voice completely devoid of any emotion, delivering the order with absolute surgical precision. The gloves were completely off. I told Harrison to begin the financial squeeze immediately. I instructed him to freeze Trent's commercial business accounts, initiate the foreclosure proceedings on my parents' stolen debt portfolio, and formally call in every single loan. It was time to burn their fake empire to the ground. A wide shot captures the morning sun breaking over the Atlanta skyline. I stand perfectly still by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office. The camera slowly tracks horizontally, framing my silhouette against the sprawling metropolis, capturing the absolute quiet dominance of a woman who just bought her enemy's entire existence. My phone rests on the glass desk behind me, silent for now. It is exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning. The financial markets are officially open, and the trap I meticulously laid has just violently snapped shut. Down in Buckhead, Trent's curated morning routine was being completely obliterated. He was likely standing at the counter of his favorite artisanal coffee shop, flashing his platinum corporate card for a $12 latte, acting like the titan of industry he pretended to be. The card declined. He probably laughed it off, flashing his trademark arrogant smirk, and handed the barista a second card. Declined. By the time he stormed out to the sidewalk to scream at his bank's customer service representative, the reality of his situation was already sealed. His accounts were not just suspended, they were frozen, locked down with zero-tolerance holds. The anonymous Delaware LLC that now owned his debt had triggered an immediate collection notice. The grace period was over. The full balance of his commercial loans, including the exorbitant penalty fees and accumulated interest, was due immediately. If he could not produce the funds within 48 hours, his shell company would be forced into involuntary bankruptcy and his personal assets would be seized. Panic is a highly predictable emotion. Trent did not call his sleazy lawyers, and he certainly did not tell Chloe that his fake wealth had vanished. He went straight to his favorite personal ATM. He burst into Marcus's boutique real estate firm, bypassing the receptionist and slamming the heavy oak door to my father's office. Marcus was already drowning in a sea of unpaid invoices for Chloe's extravagant wedding. The florist was threatening to cancel the imported Dutch orchids, and the historical venue was demanding their final massive deposit by the end of the business day. Trent, sweating profusely through his expensive tailored suit, dropped into a leather guest chair and begged my father for another massive, undocumented cash infusion. He spun a desperate, frantic lie about a temporary banking glitch and an incoming wire transfer from overseas that was just slightly delayed. He begged Marcus to leverage whatever he had left, suggesting they extract even more equity out of Grandma Josephine's historic estate. Marcus paced behind his mahogany desk, furiously rubbing his temples. He was utterly trapped by his own obsession with status. If Trent went bankrupt just weeks before the wedding, the wealthy white family Marcus so desperately wanted to impress would completely cut them off. The entire fragile facade of the Addams family's generational wealth would shatter in public. Marcus could not let that happen. He told Trent that Grandma Josephine's house was entirely tapped out, completely unaware that I was the unseen creditor currently holding the deed to his mother's property. But Marcus was an arrogant man who genuinely believed the rules did not apply to him. He pulled up his firm's master financial accounts. Driven by sheer panic, he decided to illegally commingle client escrow funds with his own operating capital, preparing to initiate a massive unrecorded wire transfer directly to Trent to cover the frozen debt. He never got the chance to hit send. Harrison Vance, my attorney, does not believe in leaving things to chance. Exactly 3 minutes before Marcus attempted to initiate the fraudulent wire transfer, the glass doors of his real estate firm swung open. A team of stern, unsmiling investigators from the Georgia Real Estate Commission and the State Financial Board walked directly up to the reception desk. They bypassed the pleasantries, marched into my father's office, and handed Marcus a formal, immediate notice of audit. An anonymous whistleblower, armed with impeccably detailed, heavily encrypted financial logs provided by Harrison's forensic team, had tipped them off to Marcus's long history of predatory lending practices and illegal fund commingling. They demanded immediate access to his servers, his physical ledgers, and his escrow accounts. Within 60 seconds, the state board had initiated a total mandatory freeze on every single asset tied to Marcus Adams. He could not transfer a dime. He could not pay the wedding vendors. He could not bail out Trent. He was completely, undeniably ruined. Back in my penthouse, the pristine silence of my office was broken by the sharp, desperate vibration of my personal cell phone. The caller ID flashed Valerie's name. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the absolute desperation vibrating through the digital signal before I slowly picked it up. I did not say hello. I just listened. Valerie was crying. But it was not the soft, devastated weeping of a woman who had realized the error of her ways. It was angry, entitled, suffocating rage. She was practically hyperventilating, her voice shrill and demanding. She did not apologize for abandoning me at the country club. She did not apologize for letting Marcus forge my signature on commercial loan documents, and she certainly did not apologize for plotting to strip Grandma Josephine of her home while she lay in a hospital bed. Instead, she demanded that I fix her life. She screamed into the receiver that Marcus's accounts were inexplicably frozen and that Trent was facing a ridiculous legal misunderstanding that was ruining Chloe's big day. She ordered me to immediately drive to the bank, open 2 new high-limit credit cards in my name, and hand over the cash to cover Chloe's wedding venue deposit before 5 o'clock. She actually had the unmitigated audacity to tell me that if I did this one simple thing for the family, she might consider letting me attend the reception instead of just the ceremony. I held the phone to my ear, listening to her frantic, shallow breathing and her endless toxic demands. I felt absolutely nothing for her. No pity, no obligation, no anger. Just the profound, liberating realization that they had entirely destroyed themselves. I lowered the phone from my ear, pressed the red button to end the call, and casually tossed the device onto my desk. The silence in my office was absolute perfection. I let the phone sit on the desk, the dark screen a testament to the boundary I had finally permanently erected. There would be no more negotiating, no more pleading, and absolutely no more bailing them out. I glanced at the vintage Rolex on my wrist. It was time to get dressed. Chloe's rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 7 o'clock at L'Etoile, a Michelin-starred French restaurant that Marcus had booked months ago, back when he still possessed the illusion of liquid capital. I knew for a fact that the final payment for the private dining room was due tonight. I also knew that because of the state board's audit, Marcus's business accounts were completely frozen and his personal accounts were deeply overdrawn. He was walking into a $15,000 dinner with absolutely no way to pay the bill. The camera transitions to a slow, deliberate tracking shot following closely behind me. My heels click rhythmically against the polished marble floor of the restaurant's grand foyer. I am wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue silk suit, the cut sharp and unforgiving, paired with diamond drop earrings that catch the dim ambient light. I do not look like a scapegoat. I look like the person who owns the building. As I push open the heavy double doors leading into the private Bordeaux room, the camera smoothly shifts focus from my back to the faces of the people seated around the long candlelit table. The transition is instantaneous. Laughter dies in throats. Wine glasses halt halfway to mouths. Chloe, draped in a ridiculous white feathered dress, drops her fork. Trent pales, his arrogant smirk melting into an expression of sheer panic. Marcus looks like he might actually have a heart attack, his eyes darting frantically toward the restaurant manager standing near the entrance. But my focus lands directly on Valerie. Her face contorts from shock into pure, unadulterated fury. Sitting at the head of the table are Trent's parents, the embodiment of old Southern money. His mother, an icy woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a string of authentic pearls, looks at me with immediate distaste, clearly having been fed whatever pathetic narrative my parents spun to explain my absence. Valerie does not even hesitate. She shoves her chair back so violently it screeches against the hardwood floor. She marches directly toward me, her face flushed with rage, desperately trying to intercept me before I can reach the main table. She grabs my upper arm, her manicured nails digging into the silk of my suit, and tries to physically shove me back toward the doors. "You do not belong here." Valerie hisses, her voice a harsh, desperate whisper meant to evade the ears of her future in-laws. "Get out right now before you ruin your sister's night." I smoothly pry her fingers off my arm, stepping past her with a practiced elegance that leaves her stumbling slightly. I approach the table, my presence commanding the entire room. Trent's mother leans back in her chair, eyeing me up and down with a condescending sneer. She takes a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive Chardonnay. Well, Trent's mother says, her voice carrying a sweet, passive-aggressive poison. "I suppose we should have expected the estranged sister to crash the party. Valerie mentioned you have been dealing with some severe financial struggles lately, Nia. I assume you are here because you needed a hot meal." A suffocating, tense silence falls over the room. Chloe looks smug, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine hovering inches above her neck. Marcus is visibly sweating, his eyes darting wildly. Trent is gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles are white. They are all waiting for me to shrink, to break under the weight of the old money condescension, to apologize and retreat into the shadows, exactly as I had done my entire life. I do not shrink. I look directly into the icy eyes of Trent's mother and offer a smile so sharp it could cut glass. "I actually ate before I arrived," I reply, my voice perfectly level and echoing clearly in the quiet room. "I am just here to settle a debt." I raise my hand, snapping my fingers sharply. The restaurant's general manager, who had been hovering nervously by the service doors, immediately steps forward. He is holding a sleek leather billfold. He looks terrified, glancing apologetically at Marcus before turning to me. He knows Marcus's cards have all declined. The entire management staff knows. I reach into my designer bag and pull out 3 thick, heavy stacks of crisp $100 bills, still bound in the official bank wrappers. I drop the stacks directly onto the pristine white tablecloth, right in front of Trent's horrified parents. The heavy thud of the cash hitting the table makes Chloe physically flinch. "That is $15,000, I state loudly, ensuring every single person in the room, including the waitstaff, hears me clearly. "Keep the change." Valerie gasps, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus drops his head into his hands, completely defeated. Trent's mother looks at the stacks of cash, then up at me, her previous condescension replaced by sheer bewildered shock. She opens her mouth to speak, to demand an explanation for why her future daughter-in-law's estranged, supposedly destitute sister is dropping bricks of cash to save their rehearsal dinner. I do not give her the chance to ask. I lean forward, planting both hands flat on the table, leaning directly into Trent's terrified personal space, and deliver the final crushing blow. "Consider it charity," I say, my voice ringing out with absolute undeniable authority. Since Trent is currently under investigation for wire fraud and my father's accounts were frozen by the state board this morning, I figured someone had to pay for your dinner. Enjoy the champagne." The camera immediately breaks from its steady hold, switching to rapid alternating over-the-shoulder shots to capture the absolute explosion of chaos around the private dining table. The pristine, curated atmosphere of the Michelin star restaurant shatters instantly. Trent's mother drops her crystal flute, the expensive champagne spilling across the white linen. Marcus slumps back in his chair as if he has been physically struck, his face draining of all color. Valerie frantically looks between the waitstaff and the wealthy in-laws, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish as she desperately tries to formulate a lie that can cover up a state board audit. Trent is the first to recover his voice. He practically vaults out of his seat, his chair crashing backward onto the hardwood floor. He points a shaking finger at me, his face flushing a violent mottled red. He screams that I am insane, that I am a jealous, bitter outcast, making up psychotic lies because I could not handle being excluded from the family. He turns to his parents, his hands raised in a placating gesture, frantically swearing that his startup is perfectly fine and that I am just an estranged, disgruntled sister trying to extort them. The camera ceases its rapid cut, settling back into a slow, dominant push-in on my face. I do not raise my voice. I do not match his frantic, sweating energy. I simply maintain my icy composure, reach back into my leather tote bag, and pull out a thick, heavy manila folder. I toss it dead center onto the dining table. It glides smoothly past the imported floral centerpieces and stops exactly in front of Trent's father. I suggest you open that before you pay for your son's legal defense. I say, my voice cutting through the ambient panic of the room. Harrison's forensic accountants are incredibly thorough. Trent's father, a stoic man who built his fortune on ruthless pragmatism, ignores his son's panicked protests. He reaches for the folder, flipping it open. The color rapidly drains from his face as his eyes scan the top page. I narrate the contents for the benefit of the entire room. Inside that folder are highly classified bank statements routed through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They perfectly detail how Trent has been systematically siphoning Series A investor capital from his collapsing crypto startup and funneling it directly into underground sports betting syndicates. He did not lose the investor money in the market. He gambled it away to cover his massive, crippling personal debts. The federal authorities have everything they need, and the wire fraud indictments are entirely imminent. Trent's mother lets out a sharp, horrified gasp, pressing her napkin to her chest as she stares at her son in absolute revulsion. The illusion of their polished old money superiority is collapsing right in front of them. But Valerie and Marcus cannot let it go. They are entirely too deep in their own delusions. The wedding is less than 24 hours away. The socialite guests are already checked into their hotels. If Trent goes down, the entire Addams family facade burns with him. In a display of sheer, pathetic desperation, Valerie leaps out of her seat and actually attempts to defend him. She waves her hands frantically, telling Trent's parents that business accounts are complicated and that this is clearly just a minor corporate restructuring issue. She turns her venom on me, loudly proclaiming that I manufactured these documents out of pure spite to ruin my sister's happiness. Marcus immediately jumps in to back her up, his voice cracking with panic. He babbles about tax strategies and temporary liquidity issues, completely humiliating himself as he tries to legitimize blatant federal fraud. He looks at Trent's father, begging him to understand that startups experience these kinds of growing pains all the time. They are sacrificing their last shred of dignity to protect a parasite entirely because they need his fake wealth to validate their own existence. But Trent's father is not a fool. He drops the documents back onto the table with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. He looks at Trent, shakes his head, and coldly states that the family trust will absolutely not protect him from federal prison. The realization hits Trent like a freight train. His father is cutting him off. The wealthy safety net is gone. The investors are coming. The FBI is coming. Cornered, panicked, and stripped of his charming facade, Trent completely snaps. He spins around, his eyes wild and vicious, and turns his rage directly onto Chloe. He points at her, screaming that none of this is his fault. He yells that he never would have touched the investor capital if Chloe had not bled him entirely dry. He exposes her right there in front of the entire room, screaming that she forced him to steal to fund her pathetic fake luxury influencer lifestyle. He lists the demands: the custom Paris runway gowns, the daily $500 spa treatments, the Maldives overwater bungalows. He screams that she is an absolute black hole of need, demanding a billionaire lifestyle from a startup founder just so she could post highly edited photos for strangers on the internet. He looks at my parents and laughs hysterically, yelling that he had to steal because Marcus was completely broke and Chloe refused to look like a middle-class failure on her wedding day. The camera drops to a static, low angle, framing Trent against the opulent, dimly lit backdrop of the Bordeaux room. He looks completely unhinged. The perfectly tailored, confident groom has rapidly deteriorated into a cornered animal. Sweat beads on his forehead as he violently gestures toward my father, his chest heaving with panicked, erratic breaths. Trent does not stop at blaming Chloe. He turns directly to his horrified parents, raising his voice so the entire restaurant staff lingering nervously by the service doors can hear every single word. He screams that the Addams family wealth is a complete and utter hallucination. He throws Marcus entirely under the bus, detailing with vicious accuracy how my father's boutique real estate firm is nothing but a mountain of unpaid debt and predatory loans waiting to collapse. He reveals to his father that Marcus was not a victim in this wire fraud situation, but a willing, desperate participant who was ready to illegally commingle client escrow funds just to pay for this absurd, overpriced rehearsal dinner. Trent laughs a bitter, ugly laugh, pointing a shaking finger directly at Marcus's chest. He tells his parents that Marcus is drowning in so much commercial debt that his shell companies are imploding. He loudly declares that Marcus is a pathetic social climber who is so entirely broke that the bank is already preparing to foreclose on the Addams family estate. The illusion is completely shattered. Chloe sits frozen in her ridiculous feathered white dress, the brutal reality of the situation finally crashing down on her. The tears start to fall, carving tracks through her immaculate camera-ready makeup. She looks at Trent, her mouth open in a silent scream, waiting for him to walk back. His cruel words, waiting for the loving billionaire fiancé to return. But Trent does not even glance in her direction. He is entirely focused on saving his own skin, desperately trying to convince his old money parents that he was manipulated by a family of desperate frauds. Chloe finally understands the devastating truth. Trent never loved her. He never cared about their future or her carefully curated social media image. He only married into our family because he recognized that Marcus and Valerie were desperate enough for high society status that they would gladly commit federal fraud to protect him. He needed a wealthy-sounding scapegoat to cover his gambling debts, and Chloe was the perfect oblivious mark. She buries her face in her hands, her loud, racking sobs cutting through the heavy, suffocating silence of the private dining room. Valerie cannot process the absolute destruction of her carefully curated social standing. Her entire identity built on country club memberships, imported dresses, and the perception of generational wealth is burning to ash right in front of the exact people she spent months trying to impress. Trent's mother is looking at Valerie with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion, clutching her authentic pearls, as if Valerie might try to steal them. Driven by pure, irrational panic and humiliated pride, Valerie lunges across the space between them. She raises her hand, her manicured claws bared, fully intending to slap Trent across his arrogant face to force him to shut up. Trent does not even flinch. He drops the remaining shreds of his refined, gentlemanly facade and violently shoves my mother aside. He pushes her so hard by the shoulder that Valerie stumbles backward, her expensive heels catching on the edge of a heavy dining chair. She collides awkwardly with the table, knocking over a crystal water pitcher that shatters violently onto the hardwood floor. Marcus freezes, too utterly defeated by his own financial exposure and public humiliation to even step forward and defend his wife. The camera switches to a sharp, high angle looking down on Trent and my ruined family from my perspective. I stand perfectly still, my posture straight and commanding, observing the pathetic wreckage of the people who spent 20 years treating me like a disease. I do not rush forward to help my mother off the floor. I do not offer Chloe a sympathetic shoulder to cry on. I simply watch them drown in the immediate, inescapable consequences of their own toxic greed. Trent is still ranting, his voice echoing off the high ceilings as he glares at Marcus. He sneers, wiping spit from his chin loudly, declaring that by Monday morning the bank will seize the Addams family home. He screams that Marcus will be living on the street right alongside his precious spoiled daughter and that they deserve absolutely nothing. I take one slow, deliberate step forward. The sharp click of my heel against the floor cuts through Trent's hysterical rant like a gunshot. I look down at him, my expression completely devoid of pity, anger, or sorrow. "You are wrong about one thing." I state, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet volume that forces every single person in the room to hold their breath and lean in. Trent stops shouting. He looks up at me, his chest still heaving, a flicker of confusion crossing his panicked, sweaty face. Valerie slowly picks herself up from the floor, clutching the edge of the table with white knuckles, her eyes darting toward me in terror. Marcus finally looks up, his face gray and hollow, suddenly realizing that I am the unseen force behind his financial ruin. I lock eyes with Trent, delivering the absolute, undeniable reality of their situation. "You cannot foreclose on a house you do not own." "Trent," I say, letting the words hang in the freezing air for a fraction of a second before delivering the final devastating strike. "I own the deed to my parents' house." The camera begins a slow, deliberate orbit around Marcus. The sheer gravity of my words strikes him with the force of a physical blow. The arrogant, untouchable patriarch of the Addams family collapses inward. His shoulders slump drastically. His jaw hangs slack. The meticulously tailored tuxedo he wears suddenly looks 3 sizes too big, draping awkwardly over the frame of a terrified, ruined old man. He stares at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, desperately searching my face for any sign of a bluff or a cruel joke. He finds nothing but absolute freezing certainty. He stammers, his voice completely devoid of its usual booming authority. He demands to know how this is mathematically possible. His brain is violently rejecting the reality standing right in front of him. He insists that I am entirely broke. He actually has the unmitigated gall to bring up the commercial loans, the very loans he fraudulently signed in my name, stating that my credit was entirely tapped out and my accounts were empty. He demands to know how a woman drowning in fabricated debt could possibly buy a multi-million-dollar historic estate in pure cash. I reach back into my designer tote bag. I withdraw a sleek, ultra-thin tablet and slide it smoothly across the polished mahogany table. It glides past the imported floral centerpieces and stops directly in front of his trembling hands. The screen is illuminated on maximum brightness, displaying an exclusive password-protected preview of the Forbes digital front page, scheduled to publish at exactly 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. There is a high-resolution portrait of me standing confidently in my penthouse office, with the Atlanta skyline sprawling behind me. The headline is bold and undeniable. It details the historic $25 million acquisition of my botanical skincare company by Sephora. I watch his eyes scan the endless zeros on the screen. I tell him that while he was busy treating me like a social pariah, forging my signature and funding Chloe's pathetic fake influencer lifestyle, I was building an actual legitimate empire. I explain that my brand is now stocked in over 1,000 high-end retail locations globally. I did not need his approval, his country club connections, or his completely fabricated generational wealth. I built a $25 million fortress, entirely in the shadows, completely insulated from his toxic greed and Valerie's endless social climbing. The silence in the Bordeaux room is absolute and deafening. Valerie stares at the tablet screen as if it is a venomous snake preparing to strike. Her mind is violently short-circuiting. She realizes in real time that the daughter she banished to the shadows, the daughter she literally tried to physically push out of the restaurant just minutes ago, is the actual verified embodiment of the high society wealth she has spent her entire pathetic life pretending to possess. She threw away a billionaire daughter to protect a son-in-law who is about to be indicted by the federal government. Trent's parents watched the spectacle with grim, silent fascination, witnessing a family completely immolate itself at the dinner table. Chloe is sobbing uncontrollably, her feathered dress trembling as she fully grasps the magnitude of her own mediocrity. She is marrying a broke fraud who gambled away stolen money, while the sister she mocked for years is a verified beauty mogul. The contrast is devastating, and it is entirely her own fault. But Marcus is a unique breed of narcissist. The camera continues its slow, unyielding orbit, capturing the exact moment his survival instinct violently overrides his shame. The sheer repulsive audacity of the man kicks in. He physically shakes his head as if trying to clear away the humiliation, and his posture drastically shifts. The defeated hollow slump is replaced by the desperate, frantic energy of a cornered salesman. He actually tries to smile. It is a grotesque, trembling stretching of his lips that makes him look completely unhinged. He looks up at me, his eyes gleaming with a sudden predatory hunger. He calls me brilliant. He praises my business acumen, acting as if he nurtured this talent himself, as if my success is a direct result of his parenting. He completely ignores the fact that he is currently facing absolute financial ruin, that state investigators are tearing through his office, and that I just purchased the roof over his head out of pure spite. He leans forward, resting his forearms on the table, and actually pitches me a business deal. He suggests a partnership. He tells me that blood is thicker than water, and that family must stick together during turbulent times. He proposes that with my newly acquired $25 million in liquid capital and his extensive real estate portfolio, we could completely dominate the Atlanta commercial market. He spins a frantic, delusional fantasy about merging our empires, keeping the immense wealth strictly in the family, and saving the Adams legacy from public disgrace. He begs me to inject my Sephora buyout money into his failing boutique firm, promising me a senior partner title, a massive corner office, and 50% of all future profits. I let him finish. I let the absolute absurdity of his proposition hang in the quiet, candlelit room, letting every single person at the table absorb the depths of his delusion. Then I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound cuts through his pathetic sales pitch like a surgical blade. My laughter contains absolutely no warmth, no affection, and no forgiveness. It is pure, unfiltered disdain. I lean over the table, placing my hands flat on the mahogany surface, bringing my face just inches from his sweating, desperate brow. I look directly into the eyes of the man who raised me to feel worthless, the man who thought he could use my name to fund his own pathetic ego. I do not partner with people who steal their daughter's identity. I state, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that carries with absolute clarity to every single corner of the room. I am pressing criminal charges for the Social Security number theft. Marcus physically deflates the last reserve of his manufactured bravado, completely evaporating. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. The threat of federal prison for identity theft has effectively paralyzed him. The camera executes a slow, deliberate orbit around his frozen figure, capturing the absolute humiliating loss of his power before tilting downward to follow the trail of spilled champagne across the floorboards. The lens settles on Chloe. She is sitting in a crumpled heap on the floor, her custom Paris feathered gown soaked in expensive wine and entirely ruined. Trent, realizing that the Adams family is not a wealthy shield but a sinking ship laden with criminal liabilities, makes a rapid, calculated decision. He does not offer Chloe a hand. He does not apologize to his horrified parents. He simply adjusts his cuffs, turns on his heel, and walks briskly out the heavy double doors of the private dining room. He abandons his bride less than 24 hours before their wedding, leaving her to face the financial firing squad completely alone. The heavy thud of the door closing behind him shatters Chloe's paralysis. She looks at the empty doorway, her chest heaving, the reality of her shattered fairy tale finally registering. The old money in-laws are gone. The billionaire groom is fleeing federal charges. Her father is entirely bankrupt and facing prison. She turns her gaze up to me, her mascara running in thick black rivers down her flushed cheeks. The golden child, the untouchable princess of the Adams family, scrambles awkwardly to her knees. She reaches out with trembling hands, her diamond-encrusted fingers desperately grasping at the hem of my tailored trousers. She looks up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, violently pivoting her entire persona in a desperate bid for salvation. "Nia, please," Chloe sobs, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoes off the restaurant walls. "You have to understand. I had no idea what they were doing. Mom and Dad brainwashed me my entire life. They told me you were lazy, that you abandoned us. Trent manipulated me into demanding all those expensive things. I was just a pawn in their games. I just wanted a beautiful wedding. We are sisters, Nia. Please, you cannot let them destroy my life like this. You have to forgive me." I look down at her clutching hands. I do not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I take one slow, deliberate step backward, forcing her to drop her grip on my suit. The coldness in my chest is absolute and liberating. "Brainwashed," I repeat, letting the word roll off my tongue like a foul taste. I look around the room, making sure Valerie and Marcus are watching their precious daughter grovel. You were not brainwashed when you snuck into my room and stole my graduation money to buy VIP concert tickets. You were not manipulated when you stood in the kitchen and mocked my business plan, telling your friends I was destined to be a miserable minimum wage failure. Chloe flinches, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes, but I refuse to let her interrupt. I lean down slightly, bringing my face closer to hers, forcing her to hold my gaze. Do not rewrite history to save your own skin, Chloe. I state, my voice dropping to a sharp, unforgiving whisper. You love the fraud. You love the stolen money. You happily lived off the credit cards Marcus opened in my name because they paid for your designer handbags and your luxury vacations. You were perfectly fine with my destruction as long as it funded your aesthetic. I straighten up, staring down at her ruined dress. I remind her of the darkest day of my life, a day she participated in with absolute glee. I remember the day Marcus kicked me out of the house. I say, my voice ringing with crystal clarity. It was pouring rain. I was hauling black garbage bags filled with my belongings down the muddy driveway because Valerie refused to let me use the car. You stood on the front porch holding an umbrella, sipping a latte. You did not offer to help. You laughed. You took a photo of me crying in the mud and told me to hurry up because the sight of my garbage bags was ruining your view. You do not get to play the victim now just because the money ran out. Chloe covers her face with her hands, hyperventilating as the undeniable truth of her own cruelty is laid bare in front of her. But the panic of her immediate reality violently overrides her shame. The restaurant manager is still standing near the entrance, holding the unpaid $15,000 bill. Her phone is buzzing relentlessly on the table, likely notifications from the historical venue and the florist demanding their final deposits before midnight. She drops her hands, looking up at me with an expression of sheer, unadulterated desperation. She abandons the sisterly love angle and goes straight for the transaction. The vendors, she gasps, her voice ragged and breathless. The florist, the caterers, the venue. They are all going to sue me, Nia. Trent's accounts are completely locked. Dad has nothing. I am going to be humiliated in front of the entire city. I just need a loan. Just a tiny fraction of your Sephora money. $50,000 to make all of this go away and save my reputation. I will pay you back, I swear on my life. Just write a check. I stare at her tear-streaked, desperate face. I reach into my designer tote bag one last time. Valerie holds her breath, a tiny spark of pathetic hope igniting in her eyes. Marcus leans forward silently, praying I will bail out his favorite child. I do not pull out a checkbook. I pull out a single neatly folded sheet of crisp white paper. I hold it out over the table and let it go. It flutters down gracefully, landing directly on the stained white feathers of Chloe's ruined lap. She looks down at it, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. She picks it up with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the black text. What is this? She whispers, her voice trembling. I button my suit jacket, looking down at my ruined family with absolute final detachment. That is an application for an entry-level warehouse position at my Atlanta distribution center. I announce, my tone perfectly pleasant and entirely merciless. The starting pay is $15 an hour. You will be packing the very skincare products you used to mock. Fill it out completely. You can start on Monday, assuming you pass the background check. The threat of federal prison hangs in the air, thick and suffocating, completely paralyzing Marcus. The camera executes a slow, deliberate pan away from his ashen, devastated face, gliding smoothly across the wreckage of the mahogany dining table until it settles entirely on Chloe. She is sitting in a crumpled, pathetic heap on the hardwood floor. Her custom-imported feathered gown, which she had proudly flaunted just an hour ago, is now heavily stained with the dark bruised colors of spilled red wine and expensive champagne. She looks like a broken porcelain doll, her immaculate camera-ready makeup ruined by thick black tracks of mascara running down her face. Trent, who has been standing frozen near the edge of the room, finally fully grasps the sheer magnitude of the situation. The Addams family is not a wealthy shield. They are a sinking ship, laden with criminal liabilities, massive commercial debt, and impending federal investigations. He makes a rapid, violently selfish calculation. He does not step forward to help his weeping bride off the floor. He does not offer a single word of apology to her horrified parents. He simply adjusts the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo, turns sharply on his heel, and walks briskly toward the heavy double doors of the private dining room. He mutters something under his breath about calling his legal team, completely abandoning his fiancée less than 24 hours before they are scheduled to walk down the aisle. The heavy oak doors click shut behind him with a sharp, undeniable finality. The sound echoes through the Bordeaux room, officially canceling the wedding. The billionaire groom has fled. The illusion of high society dominance is entirely dead. Chloe stares at the closed doors, her chest heaving with erratic, panicked breaths, as the reality of her shattered fairy tale finally registers. The wealthy in-laws are gone. Her father is bankrupt and facing prison. Her own pristine reputation as a luxury lifestyle influencer is about to be publicly obliterated. She shifts her gaze, looking up at me where I stand perfectly composed at the head of the table. The golden child, the untouchable princess of the Addams family, awkwardly scrambles up to her knees. She drags the heavy ruined silk of her dress across the floorboards, reaching out with trembling diamond-encrusted fingers. She desperately grasps at the hem of my tailored trousers, violently pivoting her entire persona in a frantic bid for salvation. She begins to sob, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine that grates against the quiet of the restaurant. She begs for my forgiveness. She frantically claims that she had absolutely no idea what Marcus and Valerie were doing with my identity. She weaves a desperate, tear-soaked narrative insisting that she was completely brainwashed her entire life. She blames our parents, screaming that they poisoned her mind, constantly telling her that I was lazy, resentful, and utterly useless. She pivots her blame to Trent, crying that he manipulated her into demanding the extravagant lifestyle, the Maldives honeymoon, and the runway gowns. She casts herself as the ultimate innocent victim, just a naive girl who wanted a beautiful wedding and was used as a pawn in their twisted games. She reaches up, trying to grab my hand, pleading for sisterly solidarity, begging me not to let them destroy her life. I look down at her clutching hands. I do not feel a single ounce of sympathy. The coldness in my chest is absolute, steady, and incredibly liberating. I take one slow, deliberate step backward, forcing her to drop her grip on my suit. Brainwashed, I repeat, letting the word roll off my tongue with pure, unfiltered disdain. I look around the room, ensuring that Valerie and Marcus are watching their precious, spoiled daughter grovel on the floor. I look back down at Chloe and systematically dismantle her desperate victim narrative. You were not brainwashed when you snuck into my bedroom and stole my high school graduation money just so you could buy VIP concert tickets. I state, my voice dropping to a sharp, unforgiving volume. You were not manipulated when you stood in the kitchen with your sorority friends, pointing and laughing at my business plans, loudly telling them that I was destined to be a miserable minimum wage failure. Chloe flinches, as if physically struck, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes, but I refuse to let her interrupt. I lean down slightly, bringing my face closer to hers, forcing her to hold my unwavering gaze. Do not attempt to rewrite history just to save your own skin, Chloe, I say. You love the fraud, you love the stolen money. You happily lived off the credit cards Marcus fraudulently opened in my name because they paid for your designer handbags, your luxury vacations, and your pathetic aesthetic. You were perfectly fine with my absolute destruction as long as it funded your internet fame. I straighten my posture, glaring down at her ruined dress. I remind her of the darkest, most humiliating day of my life, a day she participated in with absolute, unadulterated glee. I remember the rainy afternoon Marcus kicked me out of the house. I say, my voice ringing with crystal clarity. I was hauling black garbage bags filled with everything I owned down the muddy driveway because Valerie refused to let me use the car. You stood on the covered porch holding a designer umbrella and sipping an iced latte. You did not offer to help. You laughed. You took photos of me crying in the mud for your private story, and you yelled at me to hurry up because the sight of my garbage bags was ruining your view of the front yard. You do not get to play the innocent victim now, just because the stolen money finally ran out. Chloe covers her face with her hands, hyperventilating as the undeniable truth of her own vicious cruelty is laid bare. But the panic of her immediate crushing reality violently overrides her shame. Her phone lying abandoned on the floor near her knees begins to buzz relentlessly. The screen lights up with notifications from her wedding planner, the historical venue, and the elite florist, all demanding their final massive deposits before midnight. She drops her hands, looking up at me with an expression of sheer pure desperation. She abandons the fake sisterly love act and goes straight for the transaction. The vendors, she gasps, her voice ragged and breathless. The caterers, the venue, the string quartet. They are all going to sue me, Nia. Trent's accounts are completely locked. Dad has nothing. I am going to be humiliated in front of the entire city. I just need a loan. Just a tiny fraction of your Sephora buyout money. $50,000 to pay them off, silence the rumors, and save my reputation. I will pay you back, I swear on my life. Just write me a check. I stare at her tear-streaked, desperate face. I reach into my designer tote bag. Valerie holds her breath, a tiny spark of pathetic hope igniting in her eyes. Marcus leans forward, silently praying I will bail out his favorite child and save the family from public disgrace. I do not pull out a checkbook. I pull out a single, neatly folded sheet of crisp, white paper. I hold it out over the table and let it drop. It flutters down gracefully, landing directly on the stained white feathers of Chloe's ruined lap. She looks down at it, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. She picks it up with trembling fingers, her eyes rapidly scanning the black text. "What is this?" she whispers, her voice shaking. I button my suit jacket, looking down at my ruined family with absolute final detachment. That is an application for an entry-level warehouse packing position at my Atlanta distribution center. I announce, my tone perfectly pleasant and entirely merciless. The starting pay is $15 an hour. You will be boxing the very skincare products you used to mock. Fill it out completely. You can start on Monday, assuming you pass the background check. Chloe stares at the warehouse application as if it is written in a foreign language. The crisp paper trembles in her hands, a stark white flag of total surrender. She has absolutely nothing left to say. Her entire identity has been completely dismantled. But Valerie cannot accept this. She simply cannot allow her entire reality to be destroyed by the daughter she designated as the family scapegoat. The camera pushes in tight on Valerie's face, capturing the chaotic, rapid twitch of her eye and the violent flaring of her nostrils. Slowly, the lens pulls back, widening the frame to emphasize just how incredibly small, isolated, and pathetic she looks, standing in the center of the grand, opulent dining room. Her wealthy, untouchable facade has completely dissolved, leaving behind a bitter, terrified woman clinging desperately to the dying embers of her social status. Valerie erupts. She lunges forward, her voice cracking as she unleashes a hysterical, gaslighting tirade. She screams that I am an ungrateful monster, that I owe my very existence, my success, and my fortune to the Addams family name. She violently points her manicured finger at me, invoking religion in a final frantic act of manipulation. She shrieks that the Bible commands me to honor my mother and father, that my wealth belongs to the family by divine right, and that God will severely punish me for humiliating them in front of Trent's parents and the restaurant staff. I do not raise my voice, but my words cut through her religious grandstanding with lethal precision. I systematically break down her sickening hypocrisy. I point to the empty doorway where Trent fled just moments ago. I remind her that she eagerly enabled a racist, manipulative man, willingly turning a blind eye to his blatant bigotry and massive financial red flags, all because she was violently desperate for proximity to white generational wealth. I lay her sins bare for the entire room to witness, detailing how she happily sacrificed her own black daughter, tossing me out into the street without a second thought, just to secure a country club membership and a false sense of elite superiority. She traded her own flesh and blood for an illusion, and now she is left with absolutely nothing but criminal liability. Cornered and completely stripped of her moral high ground, Valerie resorts to her absolute last weapon. She snarls, her face twisting into an ugly mask of pure spite. She threatens to call every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in the family directory. She swears she will twist this entire night, paint me as a psychotic, greedy villain, and turn the entire extended family against me so that I am permanently exiled from our bloodline. I smile. It is a slow, cold expression that causes her to immediately stop talking. I reach into the pocket of my blazer and pull out my phone. I tap the screen to illuminate it and turn it around so she can clearly see the interface. I inform her that she does not need to call anyone. I explain that my phone has been securely propped against the floral centerpiece for the last 45 minutes, live streaming this entire unedited confrontation directly to the private Addams Family Facebook group. Every single confession of federal fraud, every vicious insult, Trent's humiliating public meltdown, and her pathetic attempt to steal my success has been broadcast in high definition to every single relative she was just threatening to call. The blood completely drains from Valerie's face. She sways on her feet, her mouth opening and closing silently. The absolute finality of her social and familial destruction hits her like a freight train. She realizes that there is no spin, no lie, and no manipulation that can save her from the digital evidence her entire family is currently watching. Suddenly, the camera action shifts. A smooth, sweeping tracking shot pulls away from my mother's horrified expression. The lens glides seamlessly past the ruined dining table, the scattered financial documents, and the frozen waitstaff leading directly toward the heavy mahogany entrance doors of the restaurant. As the camera moves, the dim, moody ambient lighting of the Bordeaux room dramatically brightens, flooding the space with harsh, undeniable clarity. Right as the chaos in the room reaches its absolute peak, the massive double doors swing open with a resounding heavy thud. Grandma Josephine stands in the threshold. She is supposed to be bedridden, hidden away in a sterile assisted living facility, while Marcus and Valerie quietly drained her accounts and ignored her existence. But tonight, she is radiant, with a fierce, terrifying energy. She is recovering, clearly physically frail, but her posture is unyielding. She leans heavily on a polished silver cane supported on her other side by her stern, uniformed private nurse. She wears a sharp, tailored suit, looking every inch the formidable matriarch that Marcus always pretended to be. Valerie sees her and immediately acts on pure delusional instinct, believing that Josephine is still the vulnerable, isolated woman they kept in the dark. Valerie lets out a loud, theatrical sob. She physically runs toward the doorway, her arms outstretched, intending to throw herself at Josephine to play the helpless, victimized daughter-in-law. She opens her mouth to spin a fresh web of lies about my cruelty and beg for protection. She never gets the chance. With surprising speed and ironclad authority, Josephine lifts her silver cane off the floor and thrusts it straight forward. The heavy metal tip hovers rigidly in the air, stopping Valerie dead in her tracks just inches away from a fake embrace. Valerie freezes her arms suspended awkwardly, her theatrical tears instantly drying up under the blazing, furious heat of the older woman's gaze. Josephine lowers the cane with a sharp crack against the hardwood floor. She does not look at Chloe sitting in her ruined dress. She does not look at the scattered bank statements. She locks her eyes directly onto Marcus, her own son, and then shifts her deadly glare to Valerie. The silence in the restaurant is so profound that the ambient noise of the city outside seems to vanish entirely. I saw the live stream. Josephine states, her voice raspy but echoing with absolute devastating finality. "You are both dead to me." The camera drops to a slight low angle on Josephine, emphasizing her absolute matriarchal authority as it begins a slow, deliberate push in on her weathered but fiercely intelligent face. Valerie stammers, her hands fluttering in front of her chest as she attempts to construct a defense, but her voice catches in her throat. Marcus looks like he has seen a ghost. His jaw works soundlessly, his eyes darting between his mother and the heavy silver cane that just blocked his wife's pathetic theatrical display. Josephine does not break eye contact with her son. She tells him that for months, she lay in that sterile assisted living facility listening to his hollow excuses about why he could not visit. She details how she listened to his panicked phone calls in the hallway, piecing together his massive commercial debt and his fraudulent schemes. She states with brutal clarity that she was never too sick to understand what was happening to her own family, only too disgusted to intervene until she saw exactly how far he would go. She points her cane directly at the tablet still displaying the live stream to the private family group. She announces that she watched every single second of his cowardice. She watched him throw his own flesh and blood to the wolves to protect a criminal groom and his own fragile ego. Valerie finally finds a fraction of her voice, taking a tentative step forward, her hands clasped together in a desperate plea. She cries out that Josephine does not understand the pressure they were under, that they were only trying to protect the Adams legacy and ensure Chloe had the future she deserved. Josephine cuts her off with a sharp, humorless laugh. She turns her piercing gaze to Valerie, stripping away decades of the woman's arrogant facade in an instant. She tells Valerie that the only legacy she ever cared about was her own vanity. She mocks Valerie's country club aspirations and her pathetic obsession with high society validation, stating clearly that Valerie married into the Adams family for the wealth and spent the next 30 years trying to destroy the very foundation that built it. Josephine declares that she built the family salon empire with her own 2 hands, sweeping floors and working 16-hour days, only to watch her weak, spineless son and his shallow wife treat her life's work like an unlimited, personal ATM. Marcus steps forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture, his face slick with a fresh layer of panicked sweat. He begs his mother to lower her voice nervously, glancing at Trent's parents, who are standing frozen in the corner, witnessing the absolute destruction of the Adams patriarch. Marcus frantically promises that he can explain the financial discrepancies, that he just needs a small loan from the family trust to cover the immediate debt, and that he will pay back every single cent once the market corrects itself. The slow push in on Josephine stops. She stands perfectly rigid, supported by her nurse, and gestures to the thick leather folio tucked under the nurse's arm. The nurse steps forward, unzipping the folio, and produces a thick stack of legally binding documents bearing the seal of the most ruthless estate law firm in Atlanta. Josephine looks Marcus dead in the eye and delivers the ultimate inescapable blow. She announces that she spent the morning with her attorneys officially updating her will. She states that as of noon today, Marcus is entirely written out of the family trust. Every single property, every commercial investment, the entire stock portfolio, and the complete ownership of the Adams Salon empire has been permanently transferred into an irrevocable trust. Marcus physically staggers backward, his hands flying to his chest, as if he has just taken a bullet to the heart. He gasps for air, his mind completely unable to process the total evaporation of his safety net. He babbles incoherently, insisting that she cannot do this, that he is her only son, that he is entitled to his inheritance. Josephine does not flinch. She raises her voice, ensuring her words carry over his pathetic protests. She announces the final crushing detail of her legal restructuring. The wealth is completely untouchable by Marcus, Valerie, or Chloe. The sole executor and primary beneficiary of the irrevocable trust is Nia. The silence in the Bordeaux room becomes so dense it feels suffocating. Chloe, still sitting in her ruined white dress on the floor, lets out a small, strangled gasp. Valerie slumps against a dining chair, her eyes rolling back slightly as the sheer magnitude of her loss registers. They have spent their entire lives treating me like a disposable burden, isolating me and stealing my identity, only to realize that I am now the absolute gatekeeper of the generational wealth they worship. I hold the keys to the entire kingdom. I stand quietly at the head of the table, absorbing the shift in power. I do not gloat. I do not smile. I simply watch the realization wash over the room. The $25 million Sephora deal was my own victory, built from nothing. But this is absolute karmic justice. Josephine saw my worth when my own parents tried to bury it. She saw my work ethic, my integrity, and my refusal to break under their constant psychological warfare. She handed me the empire because she knew I was the only one capable of honoring it. Marcus is completely broken. The federal authorities are closing in on his wire fraud. His commercial real estate firm is bankrupt. Trent has abandoned them. And now the family fortune he believed was his birthright has been handed directly to the daughter he despised. The weight of his utter failure physically crushes him. He steps toward Josephine, his knees buckling under the pressure. He literally falls to the hardwood floor, landing hard on his knees in his ruined, oversized tuxedo. He looks up at his mother, tears of absolute terror and defeat streaming down his gray face. He reaches out with shaking hands, his pride completely evaporated. He begs her for a second chance. He cries that he will do whatever she wants, that he will change, that he cannot survive this without her help. He pleads for just one more opportunity to make things right. Josephine looks down at him, her expression a mask of cold, unyielding judgment. She tightens her grip on her silver cane, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. You threw your second chance out in the rain when you kicked Nia out. The scene cuts violently from the suffocating silence of the restaurant to a chaotic, violently shaking handheld shot the very next morning. The camera jerks upward just as a heavy steel battering ram smashes against the custom mahogany door of Trent's downtown penthouse. Splinters fly across the pristine marble hallway. A chorus of federal agents screams for entry, their voices echoing off the high ceilings of the exclusive multi-million-dollar residential tower. The door buckles and caves inward. A swarm of tactical gear and windbreakers floods the immaculate minimalist apartment. Trent is standing in the center of his expansive living room wearing imported silk pajamas, holding a sleek silver laptop. He looks like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. He tries to scramble toward the balcony, perhaps to toss the laptop over the edge, but two agents tackle him to the floor before he can take a single step. The heavy thud of his body, hitting the imported hardwood floor, signifies the absolute end of his billionaire facade. My legal team did not waste a single second after I left the restaurant last night. They had spent months quietly compiling a massive, undeniable mountain of evidence detailing Trent's wire fraud, his elaborate shell companies, and the staggering number of fraudulent commercial loans he and Marcus had secured using my stolen identity. While Trent was fleeing his own rehearsal dinner, my lead attorney was handing that expedited, airtight dossier directly to the federal investigators. The paper trail was flawless, painting a crystal-clear picture of a man who built an empire entirely on stolen credit and ghost accounts. Agents begin systematically ripping the penthouse apart. They yank designer suits from the walk-in closet searching for hidden drives. They bag up rows of luxury watches, the very same watches Trent used to flaunt on social media, cataloging them as evidence of goods purchased with stolen funds. They confiscate his phones, his tablets, and the safe hidden behind a modern art canvas in his study. The camera pans wildly, capturing the absolute dismantling of his fake life. An agent hauls Trent to his feet and slams him roughly against his own marble kitchen island. The cold click of heavy steel handcuffs echoes through the kitchen as his Miranda rights are read aloud. Trent is hyperventilating. The arrogant, untouchable groom from the night before has completely evaporated. He is sweating profusely, his face pale and contorted in pure, unadulterated terror. He begs the agents to stop, frantically insisting that there has been a massive mistake, that he is a respected businessman, that his father knows the governor. The agents do not even pause their search. He is roughly marched out of the apartment. The camera follows closely behind, capturing the humiliating perp walk down the long, opulent hallway of the building. The commotion has drawn the attention of his extremely wealthy, image-obsessed neighbors. CEOs, local politicians, and elite socialites stand in their open doorways, wearing expensive robes, their eyes wide with shock. Whispers ripple down the corridor. Several neighbors hold up their phones, recording the glorious downfall of the city's most eligible bachelor. Trent tries to hide his face, ducking his head to avoid the camera lenses, but the physical restraint of the agents forces him to endure every single second of the public disgrace. Down in the holding area of the federal building an hour later, the reality of his isolation finally sets in. His personal bank accounts have already been frozen by court order. His credit cards are entirely useless. He is granted one phone call. He does not call his parents, knowing they will be furious at the public scandal. He calls Chloe. He desperately assumes the Adams family can still leverage their old money connections to post his bail and secure a high-powered defense attorney. He dials her number with shaking fingers, praying she will answer, praying she will forgive him for running out of the restaurant. He waits for the ring. Instead, a harsh, automated, computerized voice fills his ear. The number you have reached has been disconnected. Valerie and Marcus had completely relied on Trent's fraudulent accounts to fund their lifestyle. With his assets frozen and their own commercial debt exposed, they could not even pay their family's cellular plan. Chloe is entirely unreachable, stranded in the wreckage of her own destroyed life. Trent drops the receiver, burying his face in his manacled hands, as the walls of the federal holding cell close in around him. But the fallout does not stop with Trent. By noon, the news of his spectacular arrest is plastered across every local news network and financial blog. Trent's parents, the pristine old money elite who pride themselves on their flawless public image, go into a state of absolute vicious denial. They refuse to believe their golden son is a fraud. Instead, they decide, I am the villain. They immediately file a massive aggressive lawsuit against me for defamation, slander, and tortious interference. They claim I fabricated the entire financial dossier out of pure jealousy to ruin their son's wedding and destroy their family name. They demand a public apology and millions in damages, thinking they can intimidate me into retracting the evidence. They assume I am still the quiet, obedient girl they can bully with high-priced corporate lawyers. They are catastrophically wrong. My attorney receives their frivolous lawsuit and immediately files a brutal, overwhelming countersuit. We do not just sue for the profound emotional distress and the massive damages caused by the identity theft. We sue for every single legal fee, every stolen asset, and every fraudulent transaction tied to their son's businesses, explicitly naming their family holding company as a co-conspirator in the laundering of my stolen funds. My legal team presents undeniable proof that Trent's parents directly profited from the shell companies that were built on my ruined credit score. The counterstrike is so legally aggressive, so airtight, and so loaded with federal evidence that the judge takes one look at the filings and issues an immediate devastating ruling. To prevent the flight of capital during the federal investigation, the judge signs an emergency injunction. Without warning, the personal and corporate bank accounts of Trent's parents are instantly and completely frozen. The camera executes a slow, steady, and incredibly deliberate push-in on the massive custom iron-wrought front doors of the Addams family estate. The morning sunlight catches the polished brass handles, highlighting the sheer, arrogant opulence of the entrance. These are the exact same towering doors that slammed shut in my face 7 years ago, echoing with a sickening thud as I stood shivering in the freezing rain with my belongings shoved into black plastic garbage bags. Today the weather is perfectly clear, but a completely different kind of storm has finally hit the Addams household. Exactly 30 days have passed since Grandma Josephine marched into the Bordeaux room and legally transferred every ounce of the family wealth into an irrevocable trust under my sole control. My first act as the executor was swift and entirely devoid of emotion. I issued Marcus and Valerie a standard, legally binding 30-day eviction notice for the primary estate. They assumed it was an empty threat, a temporary power play that I would ultimately abandon because we shared the same blood. They were catastrophically mistaken. Today is day 31. The sweeping circular driveway usually reserved for imported luxury sedans and catered event vans is currently occupied by 3 massive heavy-duty commercial moving trucks. A team of burly, impatient movers in matching gray uniforms stands idle on the front portico, checking their clipboards and shifting their weight. The legal eviction order is fully active, but the physical execution has hit a pathetic roadblock. Valerie has absolutely refused to leave. She has deadbolted the heavy front doors, engaged the secondary security locks, and literally barricaded herself inside the mansion she no longer owns. I can hear her shrill, hysterical voice echoing through the exterior intercom system, shrieking threats at the movers and demanding they get off her private property. I step out of my vehicle at the base of the driveway, smoothing the lapels of my tailored silk suit. I do not walk up to the house alone. 2 marked county sheriff cruisers pull up immediately behind me, their tires crunching loudly against the pristine gravel. 4 uniformed deputies step out, adjusting their duty belts and holding the authorized eviction paperwork. We walk up the grand front steps together in absolute synchronized silence. The lead deputy pounds a heavy fist against the mahogany door, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. He announces his presence, stating clearly that he is holding a court-ordered eviction mandate and that the occupants have exactly 2 minutes to open the door before it is forcefully breached. Valerie's frantic screaming through the intercom abruptly cuts off. A tense, heavy silence falls over the porch. Then the deadbolt clicks. The door slowly creaks open to reveal Marcus. He looks completely decimated, his shoulders slumped and his face carrying the gray, hollowed-out exhaustion of a man who has lost his entire world. Behind him, standing in the center of the grand foyer, is Valerie. She is a chaotic, disheveled mess. She is wearing a silk bathrobe, clutching a priceless antique vase to her chest, as if it is a shield, her eyes wide and wild with genuine, unadulterated panic. The deputies brush past Marcus without a second glance, stepping into the foyer and informing Valerie that she has exactly 10 minutes to gather her essential personal belongings before she is physically escorted off the premises. The movers immediately flood into the house behind them, bypassing Valerie entirely as they begin wrapping the designer credenzas and rolling up the expensive Persian rugs. Valerie drops the vase. It shatters into 100 jagged pieces across the marble floor, but nobody even flinches. She lunges toward me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, desperate rage. She screams that I am a traitor, a ruthless monster who is throwing her own mother out into the streets. She demands to know how I can possibly sleep at night, knowing I am destroying my own family and rendering them homeless. I do not step back. I meet her frantic, tear-filled eyes with an expression of absolute chilling indifference. I tell her that I sleep perfectly fine. I remind her that 30 days is exactly 29 days, 23 hours and 59 minutes more notice than she gave me when she kicked me out into a thunderstorm. I state clearly that she taught me exactly how to handle unwanted, burdensome tenants, and I am simply applying her own strict maternal lessons to this transaction. Valerie covers her face, finally breaking down into loud, defeated sobs, as a deputy gently but firmly takes her arm to guide her toward the coat closet. Marcus, watching his wife completely break down, and his prized luxury furniture being hauled out the front door by strangers, makes one final incredibly pathetic play for survival. He scrambles toward me, his hands shaking violently as he reaches deep into the pocket of his slacks. He pulls out a heavy leather-bound key fob. It is the key to the pristine white Range Rover parked in the garage, the exact same luxury SUV that Valerie explicitly forbade me from using on the day I was banished from this property. Marcus holds the keys out to me, his palms sweaty and trembling. He begs me to take the car. He offers it as a grand peace offering, a trade, his voice cracking, as he pleads for just one more month in the mansion so they can figure out a plan. He swears the car is fully paid off, and all mine if I just call off the sheriffs and give them a little more time. I look down at the keys, trembling in his outstretched hand. I do not reach for them. Instead, I slowly raise my hand and point down the long sweep of the driveway, directing his attention to the vehicle I arrived in. Resting beautifully in the morning sunlight is my brand new custom-ordered midnight black Porsche Panamera. I look back at my father's horrified face and inform him that I do not want his used depreciating handouts because I bought my own ride. The realization shatters whatever pathetic delusion Marcus was still clinging to. He drops his hand, the heavy leather key fob hitting the cold pavement with a hollow metallic clatter. I do not stay to watch them load the rest of their pitiful cardboard boxes. I slide into the driver's seat of my Porsche, the engine roaring to life with a deep guttural growl that vibrates through the driveway, and I drive away without a single glance in the rearview mirror. The scene transitions with a slow, smooth pan across a stained, flickering fluorescent light fixture in a narrow, peeling hallway. The camera sweeps into a cramped, noisy two-bedroom apartment. The lighting here is harsh and unforgiving, casting sickly yellow shadows across the cheap linoleum floors and the cracked beige walls. The constant aggressive rumble of highway traffic and the thumping bass from the neighbor upstairs vibrate violently through the thin drywall. Marcus shuffles through the narrow doorway, his shoulders stooped under the weight of a taped-up cardboard box. Valerie trails behind him, her expensive silk bathrobe now stained and completely out of place in this depressing reality. She looks around the tiny living room, her face twisting in absolute revulsion. There is no grand foyer, no sweeping staircase, no catering staff to unpack her things. They are surrounded by a suffocating mountain of cheap boxes. They have to unpack themselves, inhaling the permanent scent of stale cooking oil and damp carpet. The camera cuts to a brightly lit, aggressively loud retail store at the local outlet mall. Chloe is standing behind a cash register, wearing an ill-fitting polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. The girl who once scoffed at anything less than haute couture is now forced to scan clearance items and fold t-shirts for minimum wage. Her massive personal debt accumulated during her delusion of billionaire grandeur, with a man who is now sitting in a federal holding cell, has trapped her here completely. An entitled customer snaps at her over an expired coupon, tossing a crumpled sweater onto the counter. Chloe can do nothing but swallow her pride, force a tight, humiliating smile, and apologize while ringing up the transaction. Her manicured nails are chipped, her posture defeated, and the sheer exhaustion of manual labor radiates from her tired eyes. The perspective shifts to a bustling, overly crowded real estate office across town. Marcus sits crammed into a tiny, poorly lit cubicle, situated directly next to the noisy employee restrooms. He is no longer the titan of industry. He is a junior agent at a rival firm, forced to start over from the absolute bottom to stave off total bankruptcy. A regional supervisor, a man easily 20 years younger than Marcus, wearing a sharp suit and a condescending smirk, drops a massive stack of cold call leads onto his desk, barking a harsh order to hit his daily quota before leaving. Marcus nods meekly, picking up the plastic phone receiver with trembling hands. He is forced to dial the very same elite commercial clients who used to beg for his time, enduring their polite dismissals, their sudden hang-ups, and the undeniable sound of their stifled laughter. The humiliation is constant, public, and absolute. Valerie attempts to maintain her fragile illusion of relevance. She walks into her former country club dining room, wearing her best remaining seasonal outfit, trying desperately to project her old matriarchal authority. She approaches a prime window table occupied by women she once considered her closest, most loyal confidants. The moment they see her approaching, the lively conversation abruptly stops. They do not pull out a chair. They do not invite her to sit. They offer cold, tight-lipped smiles and suddenly find excuses to check their phones or signal for the maitre d'. One woman explicitly turns her shoulder, completely blocking Valerie from the circle. Valerie is entirely shunned, stripped of the wealth that made her toxic personality tolerable. She stands alone in the center of the dining room, a total social pariah, the brutal reality of her irrelevance finally crushing her ego as she is forced to turn around and walk back to her used, dented sedan. Months drag on the grim reality of their new life, settling in as the Thanksgiving holiday approaches. The cramped apartment feels even smaller and colder as the winter weather sets in. The smell of cheap microwave dinners lingers in the air. The stark contrast between their current squalor and the lavish catered holiday feasts they used to enjoy in the Bordeaux room is unbearable. Pure desperation sets in. Marcus, Valerie, and Chloe sit around a tiny, wobbly laminate kitchen table drafting a letter. It is a masterclass in manipulation, a carefully constructed apology directed entirely at me. They spend hours choosing the exact right words, crossing out sentences, and rewriting paragraphs. They express fake remorse, claiming that family is all that matters, that the holidays are a time for healing, and begging for a chance to make amends. In reality, they are starving for an invitation to my new estate. They want access to the warmth, the gourmet food, and the undeniable wealth they can no longer touch. They seal it in a thick, cream-colored envelope, banking everything on the pathetic hope that the holiday spirit will make me weak and sentimental. Cut to the expansive, warmly lit study of my new home. A fire is roaring in the massive stone fireplace, casting a golden, peaceful glow across the room. I am sitting in a plush leather armchair, a glass of expensive red wine resting on the side table beside me. The house is completely silent, beautifully maintained, and entirely devoid of their toxic presence. My assistant walks in and hands me the day's sorted mail, the thick cream envelope sitting right on top. I recognize Marcus's frantic sweeping handwriting immediately. I slide a silver letter opener through the seal and pull out the heavy cardstock. I read the desperate pleading words. I read the hollow apologies and the pathetic attempts to invoke a family loyalty they never once showed me. I do not feel a single shred of pity. I do not feel anger. I feel absolutely nothing. With a steady hand and a perfectly calm expression, I lean forward and toss the letter straight into the roaring fireplace. I take a slow sip of my wine, watching the bright orange flames curl around the edges of their fake apology, turning their desperate manipulation into nothing but black ash. I set the empty wine glass on the mantel and step away from the dying embers, walking toward the towering glass doors of my study. I push them open, stepping out into the crisp, cool evening air. The camera follows me out, executing a slow, perfectly smooth 360-degree orbit. The glittering electric expanse of the Atlanta skyline stretches out behind me, a breathtaking sea of lights that I now stand high above. The camera movement gradually slows, finally coming to a stop, to frame me perfectly against the glowing city. I am no longer the terrified, discarded daughter shivering in the rain, with my life shoved into a black plastic trash bag. I am standing on the expansive balcony of a multi-million-dollar penthouse that I purchased with my own money, looking down at a city where I own the absolute top of the market. Standing here in the quiet altitude, the memories of the past decade wash over me in a rush of stark contrast. I remember the suffocating heavy weight of being the designated family scapegoat. I remember the endless, agonizing nights spent crying into a cheap pillow in my cramped studio apartment, wondering why my own flesh and blood despised me simply for existing. I remember the vicious, biting comments about my wardrobe, my ambitions, and my absolute refusal to be a silent, obedient prop in Valerie's pathetic country club fantasy. They had spent my entire life systematically trying to break my spirit, hoping that if they starved me of love, validation, and resources long enough, I would simply fold and disappear into the background. They needed me to be a failure to justify their own hollow, parasitic existence. But they severely miscalculated the very foundation of my character. Every single insult, every locked door, and every stolen opportunity became the ultimate fuel for my relentless drive. I took the profound, agonizing pain of their rejection and weaponized it. I channeled every ounce of that betrayal into building an airtight, untouchable empire. I worked 16-hour days until my hands shook. I analyzed market trends until my eyes burned. I forged ironclad alliances with people who valued integrity and raw talent over an old money surname. I built my fortune brick by brick, refusing to rely on the corrupt, decaying foundation that Marcus and Valerie worshipped. I turn away from the skyline and walk back inside, moving smoothly down the hallway toward the formal dining room. The space is warm, inviting, and filled with the rich, savory aromas of a gourmet Thanksgiving feast. But this table is completely devoid of toxic blood relatives. There are no passive-aggressive insults disguised as jokes, no tense, suffocating silences, and absolutely no performative social climbing. There is no anxiety about making the wrong comment or wearing the wrong dress. Sitting at the head of the long mahogany table is Grandma Josephine. She looks radiant, healthy, and entirely at peace, holding a crystal glass of sparkling cider. The heavy, oppressive burden of Marcus and Valerie's financial drain has been completely lifted from her shoulders. She smiles at me, a genuine, deeply proud smile that heals whatever lingering microscopic fractures remain in my heart. Surrounding her are the people who actually earned their seats at my table. My lead attorney, the brilliant tactician who dismantled Trent's fraudulent empire with surgical precision, is laughing loudly at a story being told by my chief operating officer. The dedicated marketing team that helped me close the $25 million Sephora deal sits across from my closest personal friends, the ones who offered their couches and unwavering support when I had absolutely nothing. This is my true family. They are a chosen circle of absolute loyalty, respect, and mutual admiration. We share food, we toast to new beginnings, and we celebrate the profound, unshakable peace that comes from excising poison from our lives. I look around the room knowing exactly what kind of miserable, bitter holiday Marcus, Valerie, and Chloe are enduring in their cramped, loud apartment, dining on regret and absolute ruin. I take my seat at this opposite end of the table, absorbing the beautiful, unburdened joy echoing through the room. I raise my glass, meeting Josephine's eyes down the length of the table, silently acknowledging the empire we saved and the toxic legacy we permanently dismantled. As the dinner conversation continues warmly around me, I slowly turn to face the camera. The background noise fades into a soft, cinematic hum. I look directly into the lens, my expression carrying the absolute, unshakable weight of total victory. They told me there was not enough space for me in their world. So I bought their world and evicted them from it. Sometimes the only way to heal from family betrayal is to become so successful that their existence becomes entirely irrelevant. Fade to black.